Although this may seem insignificant on a national level, Canada is the United States' largest electricity supplier, providing almost all of the country's electricity imports. However, these imports only account for 1% to 2% of all U.S. electricity consumption, not 8%. Some states rely significantly on Canadian electricity to power their lights. For instance, New York imports roughly 25% of its electricity from hydropower produced in Ontario and Quebec. Additionally, states like Michigan and Minnesota rely heavily on 90% of Minnesota's electricity imports come from Manitoba Hydro, whereas 95% come from Ontario. Not only do homes use this electricity, but factories, hospitals, and public transit systems do as well. If Canada were to cut back on exports, when power demand spikes due to extreme weather conditions like heat waves or polar vortices, states like New York may experience energy shortages or higher electricity costs. Why would Canada think about restricting electricity exports when energy experts predict that electricity bills in these areas could increase dramatically, potentially raising costs for households and businesses? It's not random. Rather, it's a calculated reaction to U.S. trade policies that have affected Canadian industries. For instance, in 2023, the U.S. placed a 10% tariff on Canadian aluminum, claiming that doing so was required to safeguard American jobs. In response, Canada indicated that it could use its energy exports as leverage in trade talks, highlighting the close economic ties between the two countries. While electricity makes news, the foundation of this energy war is oil, which the U.S. imports roughly 3.8. More than half of all U.S. crude oil imports come from Canada, which makes it the country's largest foreign oil supplier. Major pipelines like the Keystone pipeline system, which has been the subject of legal disputes and protests, and Enbridge Line 5, which runs beneath the Great Lakes, carry this oil to refineries in states like Michigan, Illinois, and Texas. Millions of barrels of oil are imported daily from Canada, enough to fill 240 Olympic-sized swimming pools. If Canada imposed restrictions, according to analysts at GasBuddy, the ripple effects of oil exports would be immediate. Depending on supply chain disruptions, U.S. gas prices could increase by $51 per gallon, which would add an additional $50 to $100 per trip for a truck driver filling a 100-gallon tank. Additionally, manufacturers and shipping firms would have to deal with increased expenses, which could result in more costly consumer goods, delayed deliveries, and more expensive airline tickets. This isn't merely hypothetical. In 2023, Albertan wildfires forced short-term suspensions of Canadian oil production in less than a week. Although the source of the 12% increase in gas prices is unclear, this incident demonstrated how delicate the energy supply chain is and how quickly disruptions can impact daily life. The US and Canada have been trading partners for more than 150 years, but recent policies like B'American and America First have strained this relationship. Spike severity varied by region, and shortages in states like Wisconsin were more about localized supply chain disruptions than a direct oil shortage from Canada. Let's examine two important flashpoints. Citing national security concerns, the US levied a 10% tariff on aluminum and a 25% tariff on Canadian steel in 2018. Tensions over industrial policy remain, particularly as both nations strive for domestic manufacturing, despite Canada's retaliatory tariffs on $12.6 billion worth of U.S. goods, including lawnmowers and bourbon ketchup, being lifted in 2019. The United States Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 provides tax credits for EVs manufactured in America. Canada contends that this unjustly leaves out its automakers, such as Ford and GM, who have plants in Ontario that provide parts for our assembled vehicles. On social media, small business owners frequently share stories of supply chain chaos with hashtags like #TradeWar and Canada-US feud trend. One Ontario bakery owner tweeted, "Why are we taxing each other's flow? This hurts everyone. The US and Canada aren't just neighbors. They are business partners whose economies are deeply intertwined. This dispute threatens to disrupt North American supply chains and collaboration on clean energy goals. For instance, a Michigan factory using Canadian steel might see production costs rise, leading to layoffs. Think about these links. Automobiles are manufactured across borders. For example, the engine of a Ford F-150 pickup truck may be produced in Ohio. Every year, more than $100 billion worth of auto parts cross the border, supporting over 1 million jobs in both Ontario and Michigan, where final assembly is located. 76% of America's imports of cobalt for EV batteries and roughly 14% of its uranium for nuclear power come from Canada. Canadian hydropower is also essential for U.S. states making the switch to renewable energy. In exchange, the U.S. purchases $25 billion worth of the Canadian agricultural goods each year, such as wheat, pork, and maple syrup. More than $20 billion worth of U.S. produce, including fruits and vegetables, are imported by Canada. Risks arise from this interdependence during the Texas freeze of 2021. In order to keep Americans warm, Canada increased its natural gas exports. However, if political tensions rise, this cooperation may become uncertain, leaving both countries vulnerable. How this affects your wallet. Trade disputes and energy shortages don't just occur in boardrooms. They also affect gas stations and kitchen tables. This is how increased energy costs. In 2022, a hydropower shortage in New York led to higher electricity costs, with some estimates indicating an additional $1.2 billion in costs, equivalent to $100 per household, for a more expensive gas and oil supply. If Canadian electricity becomes scarcer, utilities will pass costs on to consumers. Cuts might cause gas prices in the US to rise by $5 per gallon. Compared to the current average of about $350 for a family driving the $1,000 per month, that represents an additional $50 to $75 per month. Steel-related goods tariffs increase the cost of automobiles, appliances, and even soda cans. According to a 2023 Peterson Institute study, US-Canada tariffs reduce the average American household's disposable income for groceries by hundreds of dollars annually. Savings or vacations could make matters worse. Politics will determine the response. Although US President Joe Biden and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau have made public statements about their close relationship, tensions still exist beneath the surface due to two significant issues that could intensify the conflict. 5 pipeline conflicts. The goal of Michigan is to close Enbridge's Line 5 pipeline, which operates the pipeline, which supplies important refineries in Michigan, with 540,000 barrels of crude oil and natural gas liquids daily, is subject to environmental risks under the Straits of Mac. Pennsylvania and Ohio, Canada, views this as a red line, claiming that the closure would violate the 1977 Transit Pipelines Treaty, which ensures continuous energy flow between the two nations. If Michigan wins, more than 11 million Americans in these states may experience shortages of propane for home heating, and fuel prices may rise as a result of decreased supply. The US and Canada are vying for control of the EV battery supply chain, which depends on vital minerals like nickel, cobalt, and lithium, and are currently embroiled in legal disputes with both federal and state governments. We have less access to these resources now that Canada, which has some of the biggest undeveloped reserves in the world, has tightened restrictions on foreign investment in its mining industry. The move is meant to ensure that Canadian minerals benefit domestic industries first, but it has angered us automakers who rely on cross-border supply chains. This rivalry could delay North America's transition to clean energy and create bottlenecks in EV production at a time when both countries are pursuing ambitious climate goals. Former US diplomat Sarah Goldfader cautions that this is about who will control the future of technology and employment, not just energy. How can the mess be cleaned up while tensions are increasing? If both countries put cooperation above conflict, there will be solutions for growing renewable energy. Partnerships. Both nations are interested in strengthening their clean energy infrastructure and lowering their reliance on fossil fuels. Canada currently supplies the US with 60 TWh of electricity per year, primarily from hydro strength. Both governments could establish a dependable low-carbon energy corridor that is advantageous to both if they jointly invested in wind, solar, and hydro projects. For example, Canada's abundant hydropower resources could be crucial in assisting the US in reaching its goal of having 100% clean electricity by 2035. The US-Canada trade relationship has been tainted by retaliatory tariffs on dairy, steel, aluminum, and lumber. Renegotiated trade terms, combined with a 5-year moratorium on new tariffs, could provide much-needed stability for businesses to make plans. Investments and increased hiring would be especially beneficial to sectors like construction, agriculture, and automotive manufacturing that depend on integrated supply chains. One of the biggest concerns in trade disputes is unfair competition. Whether due to subsidized industries or concerns over environmental and labor standards, implementing blockchain tracking systems could improve transparency, allowing consumers and businesses to trace raw materials from mine to factory to market. This would not only reduce accusations of dumping cheap goods, but also ensure that both countries benefit fairly from supply chain agreements. Modernizing cross-border infrastructure, aging pipelines, and power grids pose both environmental and economic risks instead of shutting down critical infrastructure like Line 5.